And then, what happened? Many years later, the new Spice King Alex generation asked Priest Black Pepper about the history of the past. He loved hearing stories of the food god the most. Well, later, your brave father led the Allied forces and defeated the food god, ushering in the era of chaos. The food god is dead, and your father is even greater than a god. Black Pepper flattered the young Spice King, though a sly glint passed through his eyes. Spice King grinned proudly, lifting the sword that once slayed the food god. I will become a greater king than my father. There's only one taste in the world, and that's the taste of spice. His youthful face and tone resembled his father's, perhaps even more ruthless. You surely can. Black Pepper extended his bird claw-like hand with long nails, gesturing. But you have a formidable enemy. Please tell me everything you know, esteemed priest. Black Pepper's voice turned dark and ominous. No one has obtained the dark power of the food god. It is said that before the food god's death, his divine power condensed into a seed, prophesying that the Son of God would be born from it, seeking revenge on humanity. Black Pepper glanced cunningly at Spice King. Where is this seed now? In the legendary Elf Valley. Elf Valley? Why have I never heard of it? It's where the elves reside. Since they departed from humanity, no one knows where they've gone. I've searched for a long time, but to no avail. The prophesied day is perhaps approaching. Black Pepper respectfully informed the Spice King. So the esteemed priest isn't all-knowing after all, Spice King said disdainfully. It seems my secretly trained phoenix will come in handy. He approached a tall birdcage made of stone, wider than a palace, containing thousands of red birds inside. Their eyes resembled eagles, with long, sharp beaks and bodies redder than flames. The phoenixes flapped their wings, emitting cries, while sparks flew from the iron chains on their feet against the stone. Spice King blew the bamboo whistle hidden beneath his tongue. Upon hearing the command, the phoenixes immediately quieted down, glaring at the people outside the cage, ready to attack at any moment. Spice King unlocked the chains. Fly, my birds! Find the Elf Valley and reduce it to ashes! The phoenixes flew out of the stone cage with a whoosh, their wings covering half the sky. They formed a formation, flying in all directions. Where exactly was the Elf Valley? The phoenixes had flown for days and nights, yet they still hadn't found it. Far away from the East Sea, there lies a mysterious valley. Tucked behind towering cliffs and veiled by dense forests, the valley is surrounded by flowing rainbow mists, resembling the colors of a falling rainbow at the horizon. Shielded by high mountains from cold winds, the valley remains in eternal spring, regardless of the weather outside. No one has ever entered the valley, unaware that the elves of the pastoral era dwell within. Today is a grand day in the Elf Valley. Even before the sun reaches the valley, the elves eagerly open their eyes, casting spells and preparing for the grandest feast ever. They conjure honey from flower buds, turn spring water into wine, don festival attire, and adorn themselves with beautiful flower garlands. The Elf Valley echoes with melodious songs. Birds perch on tree branches, and wild beasts lie in the grass, all intoxicated as they listen. As night falls and the stars recede, the son of the food god is about to arrive. The elves gather around the Elf Rock, singing songs in the elven tongue. Elf Rock lies in the center of a pond, surrounded by small water lilies, resembling white boats floating on the water from afar. Chief Old Pumpkin leans on his staff, repeatedly caressing Elf Rock. The elves gather closer, eyes widened, motionless, staring intently, afraid to breathe. Elf Rock is covered in cracks, and with each passing year, more cracks appear, akin to tree rings. In the middle of Elf Rock lies a tiny seed with a hard shell resembling a pine cone. For today, our elven tribe has flowered it for a long, long time. When the brightest stars rise, the child of the gods will be born. By that time, bring forth your most precious gifts to offer to our future food god. Chief Old Pumpkin raises the elf staff high, and the elves cheer enthusiastically. Akika keki keki! Except for one elf lost in thought. His name is Turnip, a cabbage elf. He separates from his companions and leans against a stone covered in vines, murmuring, I'll bring the most unique gift and outshine all the other elves. Keki keki, just you? Comes a cold laugh from behind the stone. Who? Who's talking? Come out if you dare and face me fair and square. Turnip's face turns even greener with anger. A short arrow carried by the wind swiftly shoots towards Turnip. Startled, Turnip jumps into the bushes, ducking his head, narrowly avoiding the arrow. He thinks to himself, "Oh no, I've provoked her." An elf in green clothes jumps in front of Turnip. She carries a tall quiver of arrows on her back and holds a small bow in her hand, looking down at Turnip. The bow is made of precious elf wood, a reward from Chief Old Pumpkin for the first warrior elf. Sister Green, your archery skills seem to have declined, Turnip says with a forced smile. Oh, is that so? Little Green looks disdainfully at Turnip. Then what's wrong with your cloak? Turnip's face changes drastically. His most beloved green cloak has a big hole shot through by an arrow, darn it. He clenches his fists, but realizes he's no match for Little Green. He can only smile and say, I don't fight with girls. Sister Green, I won't play with you today. Hold on! Little Green grabs Turnip's cloak. No matter how hard Turnip tries to run, he can't move a step forward. Encountering this irritable first warrior is truly unlucky. Well, Little Green hesitates. I want to ask you for a favor. Turnip is astonished, his mouth wide open. Apart from Chief Old Pumpkin, Little Green never cared about any other elf. I haven't found a special gift yet. Do you have any good ideas? Little Green's tone remains cold. Requesting help and still putting on airs, Turnip mutters. What did you say? Little Green glares at Turnip, who immediately changes to a smiling face. His clever mind comes up with a brilliant idea. If I take you to find the gift, can you split it with me? Why should I? Little Green asks. Don't forget, I'm your guide. Since you're unwilling, I'll just lie down and bask in the sun. Turnip props up his legs and closes one eye, while the other observes Little Green's reaction. All right. Little Green reluctantly agrees. Turnip jumps up. I know where to find it, but you must keep it a secret. If Old Pumpkin finds out, it'll be bad. Understood. Little Green impatiently responds. Turnip looks at her, still somewhat doubtful. Would I, the first warrior, lie to you? We must make an elf vow, Turnip says seriously. The elf vow is a secret ceremony among elves. Once agreed upon, it cannot be retracted. They touch each other's pointed ears, entwining them like vines, making a pact. Turnip leads Little Green secretly to the edge of the elf valley. We can't go any further. Beyond here is the forbidden zone for elves. Little Green stops Turnip. Sister Green, trust me. I've been here many times. I promise it's safe. Turnip confidently strides forward. Little Green cautiously follows. The forbidden zone is filled with thorns, and colorful poisonous mushrooms grow everywhere. Soon they encounter a tall and long wall. The wall is made of intertwined vines and leaves, blooming sporadic wildflowers. In the center, two leaves stand out, resembling wrinkled eyes. This is the elf wall. Beyond it lies the human world, Turnip says. What? You dare to defy the elf prohibition and come here? Little Green frowns. Old Pumpkin never allows us to leave the elf wall, but no human has ever found us. Sister Green, let's go out for a little while. Old Pumpkin won't find out. Turnip uses the gift as bait. Don't you want to find the gift? Upon hearing about the gift, Little Green reluctantly agrees. All right, you must ensure two things. First, we cannot be discovered by humans. Second, my gift must be the best. Turnip vigorously nods, finding it amusing. This first warrior is indeed competitive, always wanting to be the first. Chitty Chitty, open the wall door! Both of them recited the elf spell together, and a pink wild rose spun automatically, revealing a green door in the center of the wall, slowly opening. They walked out excitedly. Passing through the magical rainbow mist, they entered the legendary human world. This was the first time the two elves had seen the human world, feeling both fresh and marvelous. In the distance lay the human villages, with square houses smaller than elf rocks. Green, puzzled, asked Turnip, "What are these vehicles with wheels for?" "Well, they're human-made tools anyway." Wheels! Green hadn't finished her sentence when Turnip hurriedly waved her hand. "I don't know about that either. Let's go back and consult the ancient elf scriptures." How strange these humans are, creating so many things. Turnip, be careful, quick hide. Turnip looked around, but there was no one. Perplexed, he asked, "What's wrong, Green?" "They can do magic too. Look at the white smoke above the houses. Extraordinary!" Turnip couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Green, that's the smoke from human food making. It comes out of the house when they cook." How peculiar, truly peculiar. Green watched with interest the human courtyard, where not far from the houses was a threshing ground. Grain piles like small mountains were heaped, and people used bamboo winnowing baskets to toss grains, with finely chopped straw fluttering in the wind, sparkling like golden raindrops in the sunlight. Across the river, beyond the arched bridge, was a small mill. A mule pulled a stone millstone in circles, grinding grains into powder. Perhaps drawn by the scent from the neighboring orchard, the mule seemed very distracted, much to the annoyance of its owner behind. Green bombarded Turnip with more questions than ever, leaving her completely overwhelmed. She shook her head repeatedly, claiming she didn't know, but Green was already lost in thought, staring at barrels, pots, and similar objects, pondering their uses. Turnip finally found an opportunity to interrupt Green's thoughts. "Green, look at that!" Both elves looked up to see a large, weary-looking crimson bird flying low. Its wings flapped slowly, indicating its exhaustion. "I've never seen such a bird before, not even in the Forbidden Forest," Turnip exclaimed. "Neither have I," Green said excitedly, then thought, "It must be our gift. I have a way to capture it." Aren't you afraid? Turnip hid behind. The bird looked fierce. What's there to fear? I have this. Green raised her bow and arrow, looking particularly heroic. You go and lure it here, and then watch me. Sister Green, please be careful. Turnip crouched on the ground, covering his head with a green cloak, while Green hid behind nearby rocks, softly calling out, "Come here, big bird, there's something tasty here." This was a straggling phoenix, long deviated from its flight path. Starving, it spotted the greens on the ground and dove down happily. Before the phoenix's beak could touch the food, Green's arrow struck its wing. It screamed in pain. Before it could react, the food became alive and grabbed it by the neck. Green pulled off Turnip's green cloak and wrapped it around the Firebird. The Firebird struggled hard. Its head got out of the hole in the cabbage cloak and screamed loudly at them. What a ferocious big bird! Green blocked the Firebird's mouth with small stones. Now their gift must be the best. Achika, cakey, cakey! Green and Turnip were extremely happy. They lifted the Firebird one after another and walked towards the elf wall with satisfaction. When we returned to the Elf Valley, the dinner party had just begun, and the Elf Valley was filled with joy. The elves drank fine wine and sang and danced around the elf rock. Listen, whose breathing is that? God of food! Listen, whose voice is that? God of food! The elves will always protect you and send you good wishes. Please come, please come. The brightest star in the sky has quietly appeared, and the elves are nervously waiting for the arrival of God. At the moment the human child was born, they were eager to meet the food god recorded in the ancient elf scriptures. The god was said to have a body like a sheep, teeth like a tiger, eyes on the soles of his feet, and a long tongue hidden in his belly. With a loud snap, the seed cracked open completely, emitting a dazzling light. The Son of God was born! The elves were shocked, with Old Pumpkin's hat crooked from fright. They all looked at each other in disbelief. The Son of God was completely different from what they had imagined. His body was tiny, each hand and foot with 5 fingers and toes, just like humans. He also had a human nose and mouth, and oh my, this was a human baby. The baby pouted and cried, scaring the elves into hiding everywhere. Some hid in the bushes, some climbed trees, and some jumped into the water. Little Potato dug a hole in the ground, burying his head in it, with his bottom sticking up high. All the elves were trembling. Human beings are the worst creatures and must never be discovered by humans, stated the first rule of the elf laws. Old Pumpkin, leaning on his staff, cautiously approached the baby, the entire elf tribe watching him, their leader. This strange son of God reminded Old Pumpkin of the day the food god met his fate. It was snowing heavily that day. Old Pumpkin lost his way and ended up at the food god's temple, just as the human allied forces stormed the sacred mountain. It was a day he least wanted to remember. The war was so brutal, and when the food god fell, his blood stained half the sacred mountain red. The food god, seeing Old Pumpkin hiding behind the statue, grasped his hand with all his remaining strength. Old Pumpkin opened his palm, revealing a glowing seed. The elf tribe must guard it with all their hearts, for the Son of God will be born from it, said the food god, before closing his eyes in agony. Old Pumpkin approached the baby as he did the food god that day and saw a beautiful baby boy. The baby opened his eyes, curious, and looked at Old Pumpkin, then reached out his chubby little hand. Old Pumpkin reached out his hand too, grasping the baby's tiny fingers, just as he had held that glowing seed so long ago. At the moment of touching Old Pumpkin, the baby suddenly stopped crying and began to laugh. The elves heard the laughter and curiously poked their heads out, gathering around Old Pumpkin again. Seeing so many elves, the baby laughed even louder. "What a lovely child!" Granny Melon, the oldest among them, smiled kindly, using a lotus leaf to wrap the baby gently. Old Pumpkin decided that no matter what the seed turned into, the elf tribe would protect him. He lifted the baby, announcing loudly, "The Son of God has arrived!" Although the elves had many doubts, they chose to follow Old Pumpkin's lead. The Elf Valley erupted into celebration once again. They lined up, offering their most precious gifts to the baby. Green and Turnip deliberately waited until last. When it was their turn, Turnip said in the loudest voice, "This is the most special gift tonight, presented by Turnip and Green Radish." Something was moving inside Turnip's green cloak, attracting the attention of all the elves. Even Old Pumpkin wanted to know what was inside, and the baby stared at the cloak intently. Turnip and Green proudly unveiled the cloak, revealing a red bird tied up in various ways, stretching its long neck. No one had ever seen such a creature before. Little Potato tried to touch its red feathers, but it pecked fiercely at him with its sharp beak, scaring him back. "What a bad-tempered bird!" Turnip bravely untied the bird's restraints, grabbing its neck. It said that red birds bring misfortune. Granny Melon, seeing the red feathers of the bird, suddenly remembered the words from the ancient elf scriptures, feeling a sense of foreboding. The elves watched nervously, as Granny Melon's words had always been very accurate. Old Pumpkin looked at the bird before him and remembered the day the food god met his demise. He looked at Turnip and Green sternly. "Did you two leave the elf wall?" The elves were in an uproar. How could an elf dare to violate the prohibition? Turnip was already trembling with fear, and Green bravely said, "I'm sorry, Old Pumpkin. We just wanted to offer the best gift to the Son of God." Old Pumpkin shook his head and sighed. "Perhaps it's not a gift, but a curse." "A curse?" The elves were astonished. At that moment, the baby suddenly started crying loudly, and the bird screamed fiercely into the sky, as if signaling to its companions. Taking advantage of everyone's distraction, it quickly flapped its wings and escaped from Turnip's hands. "If the Firebird escapes the Elf Valley, it will be a disaster for the elf tribe." Old Pumpkin's staff spat out balls of 5-colored fire, chasing after the Firebird, flipping up and down along the bird's flight path like an unshakable tail. The Firebird agilely dodged, flying quickly towards the distance. The fireballs continued to chase relentlessly, getting faster and faster, until with a bang, one hit the bird's wing. "Ah!" The Firebird screamed in pain, its speed slowing down. The elves took the opportunity to chase after the Firebird quickly. Clumsy, fat Winter Melon twisted his body as he ran, accidentally stepping on Little Soybean, tumbling into the mud. Peas, lentils, and soybeans led the legume army in pursuit, while gourds, mushrooms, and berries used all their abilities to try to surround the Firebird, but they were all forced back by it. Green and Turnip ran at the front, blocked by low bushes on both sides. "We've brought disaster!" Green shouted to Turnip, and Turnip's green cloak fluttered in the wind as if responding to Green's cry. Turnip jumped onto a tree branch and swung upwards from a low point. After a few swings back and forth, he swung higher and higher. Green followed and caught up, and the two elves jumped simultaneously. Then, Green stepped on Turnip's back, leveraging to jump into the air, but Turnip fell rapidly downwards. "We must catch it!" Green picked up the bow and arrow from behind her, pulling the bowstring towards the Firebird. As expected of the bravest elf, the arrow shot straight into the Firebird's wing. The Firebird adjusted its flight posture, but its speed noticeably slowed down. Ahead was the elf wall. Old Pumpkin chanted an elf spell. "Modo Modo, the city wall rises." Plants on the wall grew rapidly, vines connecting to form a large net, firmly covering the Firebird. "Arquica, we did it!" Turnip shouted excitedly, sweating profusely, while the elves breathed a sigh of relief. "No, this is just the beginning," Old Pumpkin said with concern, looking up at the calm sky, seemingly muttering to himself, "They're coming." The airflow became turbulent, shaking violently and getting stronger. Something was flying towards them rapidly. Not one or two, not even dozens, but hundreds and thousands of wings flapping. Distant cries came, and the sky instantly darkened as if shrouded by dark clouds. It was incredible. Flocks of firebirds! The Firebirds lined up in formation, like a ladder straight to the universe, and the elf wall couldn't stop them. "My tribe, retreat to Pumpkin Castle," Old Pumpkin ordered. The elves panicked and fled to Pumpkin Castle. Little Potato, the smallest and most cowardly, ran while crying, with the Firebird right behind him, spewing out scorching flames. Elf Valley quickly erupted into a blazing fire, flames soaring into the sky. The Pumpkin Castle is the strongest building in the Elf Valley, with a total of 72 stone staircases. Now, every stone staircase is crowded with elves. They collectively used magic to build a barrier around the Pumpkin Castle, and the fire outside the barrier was like a beast, with blazing flames everywhere it passed. The baby in Old Pumpkin's arms cried loudly, as if he wanted to scare away the vicious Firebird with his cry. The Old Pumpkin adjusted his hat and said seriously, "From today on, this is no longer our home. Humans have found this place, and we are looking for a new home. Now, I want to give you the last order. All elves must go to the Elf Valley, to the mountains, to the forest, to a place without human traces. One day, we will meet again." "Old Pumpkin, we are not leaving. This is our home," said the elves. "It's no longer safe here. For the future of the elves, leave." Old Pumpkin burst into tears. The Firebird had already flown to the Pumpkin Castle. Green pulled the bowstring, only to find that the arrows had already been empty. The elves couldn't hold on, and a group of Firebirds passed through the barrier. The Pumpkin Castle was ignited by the fire, and it was about to be unsustainable. Firebirds also broke into the elves and bit their bodies. "It's over," Old Pumpkin thought desperately. At this moment the baby emitted a dazzling light. The Firebird's eyes could not bear the white light, and it screamed in pain. This was the best opportunity to escape. The elves supported each other and escaped into the restricted area under the leadership of Old Pumpkin. The elf wall was right in front of him, and Old Pumpkin raised his scepter. "When the elf wall opens again, it's time for us to meet again. The Son of God saved us, and now I want to form a team for the Son of God to protect him from growing up safely." The elves all pricked up their ears, hoping to hear their names. Grandma Flower and Fat Winter Melon. The elves were deeply surprised by Old Pumpkin's choice. Why did he choose the oldest and fattest one? No one understood. But Old Pumpkin has his own plans. The elf whose name was not called had to leave in disappointment. They kept looking back at the Elf Valley, their home, which was burned to ashes. Fat Winter Melon scratched his head and followed Old Pumpkin. Old Pumpkin, where are we going? Where humans live. Granny Flower's originally squinted eyes widened, let alone Fat Winter Melon. They didn't dare to believe your ears. Old Pumpkin looked down at the baby. This is God's wish. Fat Winter Melon didn't understand what Old Pumpkin said, and Granny Flower was still thinking about it, but they still stepped on Old Pumpkin's footprints and walked slowly eastward. Very long. They walked into the wilderness, and the stars illuminated their silhouettes. There is still a long road ahead. After walking for a long time, Granny Flower quietly approached Old Pumpkin and said, "Someone is following us." Fat Winter Melon looked behind him alertly. Old Pumpkin raised his ears, ready to catch the bad guys following him. Sound. Don't get me wrong, it's us, Old Pumpkin. Behind them, two familiar figures, Turnip and Green, came nervously from the darkness. Old Pumpkin asked, "Why don't you leave yet?" Green wiped the tears on his face. Article 21 of the Elf Laws. Mistakes made must be made up for. It's all because of the two of us that the Elf Valley is here. Now that we have become what we are now, we must protect the Son of God and defeat the hateful humans. She handed over the bow and arrow. I don't deserve the title of the first warrior. Old Pumpkin touched Green's head and said meaningfully, "Oh, this is fate," Turnip said angrily. "Fat Winter Melon can be a guard, so can I. My elf magic is better than his, and I have to make up for the mistakes I made." Old Pumpkin replied, "Fat Winter Melon understands human diet. We need him. Granny Flower is old and needs our care. You go quickly. Be careful of humans." Old Pumpkin continued to move forward and never looked back. Green and Turnip followed silently, without stopping a step. They decided that no matter what happened, they would never leave the baby and the Old Pumpkin. Old Pumpkin walked towards the brightest star. His scepter knocked on the ground, and several small figures followed closely behind him. Where had the elves gone? Will the Old Pumpkin raise the Son of God? Will the Spicy King find the elf? Next video, the City of Fish.